The silence stretched like a taut wire across my sister's pristine living room as Cassie's manicured finger traced the edge of her pregnancy announcement card. Her voice, when it finally came, carried that particular tone of condescension I'd grown to recognize over the years. "Natalie, sweetheart," she said, not looking up from the ivory cardstock, "I've been thinking about the guest list for my baby shower, and honestly, I'm not sure it would be the right fit for you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The words hit me like ice water. Around us, the Sunday family brunch continued its gentle hum, our mother arranging fresh peonies in a crystal vase, our father absorbed in the business section of the Portland Tribune, our brother David spreading cream cheese on his everything bagel. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just Cassie and me, sitting across from each other on her designer sectional sofa. "What do you mean?" I managed, though part of me already knew where this conversation was heading. Cassie finally looked up, her green eyes holding that familiar mixture of pity and superiority that had defined our relationship since childhood. "Well, you know how these things are. The other women attending, they're all professionals, successful in their careers. Marketing executives, real estate agents, boutique owners, they'll be talking about their businesses, their achievements." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I just don't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place." The coffee mug in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. For the past 6 years, as far as my family knew, I worked at Grind Coffee House in downtown Portland, pulling espresso shots and crafting foam art for the morning rush. It was a simple explanation that avoided complicated questions, and I'd grown comfortable with the assumption that I was the underachiever in the Brooks family. Cassie had always been the golden child. 3 years older than me, she'd graduated magna cum laude from the University of Oregon with a business degree, landed a coveted position at one of Portland's most prestigious marketing firms, and worked her way up to senior account director by age 30. She lived in a sprawling Tudor-style home in the West Hills, drove a pristine white BMW, and had married Marcus, a successful financial advisor who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. Meanwhile, I lived in a modest apartment in southeast Portland, took the bus to work most days, and wore vintage dresses I found at thrift stores. To outside observers, the contrast between us was stark and telling. Cassie embodied success and sophistication, while I appeared to be stuck in a perpetual state of finding myself. "I think you're being unfair," David interjected, finally looking up from his bagel. At 28, he occupied the middle ground in our family dynamic, successful enough as a graphic designer to avoid Cassie's judgment, but not so ambitious as to threaten her position as the family star. "Nat should be there. It's a family celebration." Cassie's expression hardened slightly. "Of course it's about family, David, but it's also about creating the right atmosphere. These women are going to be discussing their careers, their investments, their business ventures. What is Natalie going to contribute? Stories about difficult customers and the art of steaming milk." The casual cruelty in her voice made my chest tighten. This wasn't the first time Cassie had made it clear that she considered my life choices embarrassing. At family gatherings, she'd introduce me to her friends with phrases like, "This is my sister Natalie, she's still figuring things out," or "Nat's taking the scenic route through life." When I'd missed her housewarming party because I was working, she'd made a pointed comment about how some people had the luxury of flexible schedules at entry-level positions. Our mother Eleanor finally turned from her flower arrangement, her brow furrowed with concern. "Cassandra, honey, that seems a bit harsh. Natalie works very hard, and she's family." "Surely, Mom, you don't understand the dynamics of these events." Cassie interrupted, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining things to people she considered less sophisticated. "This isn't just a party, it's networking. These women are potential clients, future business connections. I need to maintain a certain image." The implication was crystal clear. I was a liability to that image. My father Robert lowered his newspaper and studied both of us over his reading glasses. He'd built a successful accounting practice from the ground up, and had always been proud of what he called honest work, regardless of the paycheck attached. "Cassie, your sister has always been there for family events. This seems unnecessarily harsh." But Cassie had made up her mind, and when she set her jaw in that particular way, arguments became futile. "I'm not trying to be mean. I'm being practical. The shower is at Riverside Country Club. We're having it catered by Provence, that French place downtown. The conversation is going to be about career achievements, business strategies, investment opportunities. Natalie would feel out of place, and honestly, it might be awkward for everyone. She reached for her phone, scrolling through what I assumed was the guest list. Look, Sarah Chen is coming. She just opened her third dental practice. Monica Williams will be there. She's the real estate agent who sold that $10 million house in Lake Oswego last month. Jennifer Martinez is flying in from San Francisco. She just got promoted to VP at her tech company. These are the conversations that will be happening. The litany of achievements felt like tiny cuts, each one designed to highlight how far short I fell of her expectations. What Cassie didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while she was building her marketing empire, I'd been building something entirely different. During my supposed coffee shop years, I'd actually been completing my medical degree at Oregon Health and Science University. The early morning shifts at Grind weren't my career, they were how I paid for medical school without burdening my family with student loans or drawing attention to my studies. The long hours I claimed to be working were often spent in hospital rotations, studying for boards, or completing my residency in emergency medicine. For the past 2 years, I'd been working as an attending physician at Seattle Medical Center, making the 3-hour drive north every few days to maintain the illusion that I still lived and worked in Portland. It was an exhausting double life, but I'd had my reasons for keeping it secret. I'd wanted to prove myself without the family dynamics that came with expectations and comparisons. I'd also wanted to know who really supported me for who I was, not what I could achieve. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Cassie was excluding me for my perceived lack of professional success, I was actually earning more in a single shift than she made in a week. I understand, I said quietly, setting down my coffee mug with steady hands. If that's how you feel, I respect your decision. The surprise that flickered across Cassie's face suggested she'd been prepared for an argument, not gracious acceptance. Really, you're not going to make a big deal about this? It's your celebration, I replied. You should surround yourself with whoever makes you most comfortable. David shook his head in disgust. This is ridiculous, Cassie. You're treating Nat like she's somehow less than you because she doesn't broadcast her achievements. Cassie laughed, though there was no humor in it. I'm not being cruel, I'm being realistic. We're at different places in our lives, and that's okay. Not everyone can be professionally successful. Someone has to make the coffee. The dismissiveness in her voice sparked something cold and determined in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding this exact dynamic, keeping my career quiet specifically to prevent these kinds of comparisons and competitions. But as I sat there, listening to my sister reduce my worth to coffee-making skills, I realized that my silence had been interpreted as inadequacy, rather than humility. Our mother made one final attempt at mediation. Cassie, sweetheart, maybe you could reconsider. Family should come first. But Cassie was already moving on, pulling up photos on her phone of the country club's event space. The party is in 3 weeks. We're doing a champagne brunch theme, well, sparkling cider for me, obviously. I've hired a photographer to capture everything. It's going to be absolutely perfect. As she scrolled through images of elegant table settings and floral arrangements, I found myself thinking about the patient I'd treated just 2 days earlier, a pregnant woman who'd come into the emergency department with severe complications. I'd spent 6 hours ensuring both mother and baby survived what could have been a tragic situation. That woman had thanked me with tears in her eyes, calling me her hero. But here, in my family's living room, I was being deemed unfit to celebrate new life because I supposedly lacked professional accomplishments. The rest of the brunch passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Cassie chattered about nursery themes and birth plans, while I nodded politely and helped clear dishes. When it was time to leave, she hugged me with the same patronizing affection she might show a child who'd disappointed her, but deserved sympathy rather than anger. Don't take it personally, Nat, she whispered in my ear. Maybe next time, for the christening or first birthday, the guest list can be more inclusive. As I walked to my car, a modest Honda Civic I drove when visiting family, keeping my actual BMW parked at my Seattle apartment, I felt that familiar mixture of hurt and frustration that had defined so many of our interactions over the years. But underneath those familiar emotions, something new was stirring, a sense of anticipation. David caught up with me in the driveway. I'm really sorry about that. She was completely out of line. It's fine, I said, though we both knew it wasn't. No, it's not fine. You shouldn't have to put up with her condescension just because she thinks her job makes her better than everyone else. He ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated. I don't know why you let her talk to you like that. I looked back at the house, where through the window I could see Cassie showing our parents something else on her phone, probably more details about her perfect celebration. Sometimes people need to learn lessons in their own time, in their own way. What do you mean? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Nothing, just that life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. 3 weeks later, as I prepared for what would become the most memorable baby shower in Brooke's family history, I reflected on how sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Cassie had no idea that her attempt to exclude me would become the catalyst for a revelation that would change our family dynamics forever. The morning of the shower, I received a text from David. Still can't believe she didn't invite you. This is going to be awkward explaining to relatives why you're not there. I replied, don't worry about it. I have a feeling everything will work out exactly as it should. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already made arrangements to be in Portland that weekend.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Not for the shower, of course, but for something else entirely. Sometimes the universe has its own sense of timing, and as I would soon discover, this particular Saturday was going to be full of surprises for everyone involved. The story of how I became a doctor while my family thought I was serving lattes begins 7 years earlier, during my sophomore year at Portland State University. I was majoring in biology with dreams of medical school, but those dreams felt impossibly distant given our family's financial situation. My parents ran a comfortable middle-class household, but medical school tuition was a mountain too steep for their accounting practice, and my mother's part-time teaching income to climb. Cassie was already establishing herself in the marketing world, fresh out of college, and eager to remind everyone of her achievements. She'd landed her first job at Meridian Marketing, and spent family dinners regaling us with stories of client presentations and campaign successes. Her confidence was infectious, but it also cast a long shadow over my own uncertain academic path. The turning point came during a particularly brutal organic chemistry midterm. I'd been struggling to balance my coursework with 2 part-time jobs, trying to save money for what I hoped would eventually be medical school applications. As I sat in the lecture hall, staring at molecular structures that seemed to dance mockingly on the page, I felt the weight of impossibility settling over me like a heavy blanket. That afternoon, I found myself walking aimlessly through downtown Portland, questioning everything I thought I wanted from life. I ended up at Grind Coffee House, a small independent cafe tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on Northwest 23rd Avenue. The owner, Margaret Chen, was a 60-something former nurse who'd opened the cafe after retiring from 40 years at Good Samaritan Hospital. Margaret took one look at my defeated expression and set a steaming mug of coffee in front of me without being asked. Rough day. Something about her gentle demeanor opened the floodgates. I found myself telling this stranger about my medical school dreams, my financial constraints, and my growing certainty that I was pursuing something beyond my reach. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished my rambling confession, she refilled my mug and sat down across from me. You know, I've seen a lot of young people over the years who wanted to be doctors. Most of them talked about the prestige, the money, the respect that comes with the title. You haven't mentioned any of those things. She was right. What I'd talked about was the emergency room volunteer work I'd been doing, the satisfaction I felt when I could help someone in crisis, the way medical problems felt like puzzles I was desperate to solve. The thing about becoming a doctor, Margaret continued, is that it's not just about having the money for school, it's about having the determination to find a way, even when the path isn't clear. And sometimes, that path looks different than what everyone else expects. That conversation changed everything. Margaret offered me a job at Grind, with flexible hours that would accommodate my class schedule and studying. More importantly, she became my first ally in what would become an elaborate plan to fund my education while maintaining the privacy I craved. Working at the coffee shop taught me patience, attention to detail, and how to stay calm under pressure during the morning rush. But more than that, it gave me a front row seat to observing human nature. The regular customers became characters in an ongoing story, each with their own struggles, dreams, and daily dramas. I learned to read people's moods in their coffee orders, to provide comfort through small talk, or respectful silence depending on what someone needed. Mrs. Rodriguez came in every Tuesday, after her chemotherapy treatments, always ordering a decaf vanilla latte with extra foam. She'd tell me about her grandchildren while I prepared her drink, and I'd listen for any changes in her voice or energy that might indicate how her treatment was progressing. When she missed 3 Tuesdays in a row, I worried about her until she returned with news that her latest scans were clear. James Patterson stopped by every morning before his construction job, always ordering a large black coffee and a blueberry muffin. He'd been studying for his contractor's license at night, while working full days, and we'd quiz each other on our respective studies during quiet moments. When he finally passed his exam and started his own business, he brought his crew to the cafe to celebrate. These interactions reinforced my desire to pursue medicine, but they also taught me something unexpected about the value of work that others might consider ordinary. Every job that serves people has dignity and purpose, regardless of the paycheck or social status attached to it. Meanwhile, my family's perception of my career trajectory was crystallizing in ways that both frustrated and motivated me. Cassie had been promoted twice in her first 2 years at Meridian, and her success became the measuring stick against which my own progress was evaluated. Family gatherings increasingly featured updates on her latest campaigns and client acquisitions, while my contributions to the conversation were politely acknowledged, but rarely explored in depth. The assumption that I was simply treading water while figuring out my life became so entrenched that correcting it would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. When I switched my major from biology to pre-med, I told my family I was exploring different options. When I began taking MCAT prep courses, I mentioned I was considering graduate school someday. When I actually took the MCAT, I said I was keeping my options open. Each small deception built on the last, creating a protective bubble around my true ambitions. I told myself I was avoiding the pressure and expectations that came with declaring medical school intentions, but the truth was more complicated. Part of me was terrified of failing publicly, of having to admit that I'd aimed too high and fallen short. By keeping my dreams private, I could pursue them without the weight of family opinions and advice. The day my MCAT scores arrived, I was working the afternoon shift at Grind. Margaret had given me permission to check my email during my break, understanding how important this moment was. When I saw the numbers on my screen, I had to read them 3 times before believing them. I'd scored in the 95th percentile, well above the threshold for competitive medical schools. I called in sick the next day, and spent hours researching schools, application requirements, and financial aid options. The numbers were daunting, but for the first time, they felt achievable rather than impossible. I'd saved nearly $15,000 from my cafe job, and with scholarships and loans, I could make it work. The application process became my secret second life. I wrote personal statements during slow periods at work, requested transcripts during my lunch breaks, and scheduled interviews around my cafe schedule. Margaret became my unofficial advisor, helping me practice interview questions and offering insights from her years in healthcare. When acceptance letters began arriving, I felt a mixture of elation and terror. Oregon Health and Science University offered me a spot in their program with a partial scholarship. The reality of medical school was no longer a distant dream, but an imminent possibility that would require completely restructuring my life. The hardest part was maintaining the illusion of normalcy with my family. When Cassie announced her engagement to Marcus, the celebration dinner focused entirely on wedding plans and her bright future. When asked about my own plans, I mentioned that I was considering some educational opportunities, but wasn't ready to commit to anything specific. My parents' gentle concern about my lack of direction was harder to bear than Cassie's subtle condescension. They'd raised me to be honest and straightforward, and my secretiveness went against everything they'd taught me about family communication. But I'd come too far to change course, and the fear of disappointing them, if medical school didn't work out, kept me committed to my chosen path of privacy. Starting medical school while maintaining my cover story required logistics that would have impressed a spy novelist. I arranged my cafe schedule to work primarily weekends and evenings, telling Margaret I was taking some college courses during the week. My family believed I was working full-time and taking the occasional night class to finish my bachelor's degree. The first year of medical school nearly broke me. The coursework was more demanding than anything I'd ever experienced, requiring complete immersion in subjects like anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry. I'd come home from 14-hour study sessions and have to put on my barista apron for the evening shift, switching mental gears from cellular respiration to customer service. Margaret was the only person who knew the full truth, and she became my lifeline during the most challenging periods. When I'd fall asleep standing up during the morning rush, she'd quietly cover for me. When I'd break down crying from stress in the storage room, she'd listen without judgment and remind me why I'd chosen this path. The clinical rotations in my third year changed everything. Finally, I was working directly with patients, applying everything I'd learned to real medical situations. The emergency department rotation was particularly transformative, confirming that emergency medicine was where I belonged. The fast-paced environment, the variety of cases, and the immediate impact I could have on people's lives aligned perfectly with my natural skills and interests. Sarah Martinez, the attending physician who supervised my emergency medicine rotation, became my mentor and eventually helped me secure my residency position at Seattle Medical Center. She was the first person besides Margaret to know about my double life, and her support was crucial during the application process for residency programs. The decision to do my residency in Seattle, rather than Portland, was strategic. The distance allowed me to maintain my cover story, while gaining experience at a top-tier hospital. I told my family I'd gotten a management position at a coffee chain that required frequent travel, explaining my absences and irregular schedule. For 3 years, I lived this exhausting double life. I'd work 12-hour shifts in the emergency department, dealing with everything from heart attacks to car accidents, then drive 3 hours south to Portland for family gatherings, where I'd nod along as Cassie discussed her latest marketing campaigns, and my parents worried about my lack of career advancement. The irony was almost unbearable at times. While my family saw me as the unsuccessful sister who couldn't commit to a real career, I was actually saving lives on a daily basis. I'd successfully treated gunshot wounds, diagnosed rare conditions, and helped deliver babies in emergency situations. I'd published research papers on trauma medicine and been recognized by my peers for clinical excellence. But at family dinners, I was still just Natalie who worked at the coffee shop and seemed to lack direction. The most challenging moment came during my final year of residency, when my grandmother had a heart attack and was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Portland. I happened to be in town for a rare weekend off when we got the call. At the hospital, surrounded by my panicking family, I had to stand by helplessly as the medical team worked on her, biting my tongue when I disagreed with their initial treatment approach. Grandma Rose survived, but watching my family's fear and confusion about her medical care, while knowing I could have helped, was almost more than I could bear. That night, I seriously considered revealing my secret, but ultimately decided that my grandmother's recovery was more important than my need for recognition. When I finally finished my residency and accepted my position as an attending physician at Seattle Medical Center, I felt both pride and profound loneliness. I'd achieved everything I'd dreamed of, but I had no one to celebrate with except Margaret, who threw me a small party at the cafe after hours. The salary I earned as an attending physician was more money than I'd ever imagined having. I paid off my student loans within months and started saving for the future. I bought a small but elegant apartment in Seattle, with a view of Elliott Bay, furnished it with pieces I'd carefully selected, and finally felt like I was living the life I'd worked so hard to build. But the disconnect between my professional success and my family's perception of my life grew more painful with each passing month. Cassie's wedding had been a particularly difficult event, as she'd made several comments about hoping I'd find my direction soon, and maybe meet someone who could help stabilize my life. Standing in my scrubs in the hospital break room, reading her text about the baby shower guest list, I realized that my years of protecting my family from disappointment had actually protected them from nothing. They still worried about me, still saw me as unfulfilled and struggling. The only difference was that now their concern was mixed with pity and condescension. The decision to attend the baby shower wasn't born from a desire for revenge or dramatic revelation. It came from a much simpler place, the realization that my sister was about to become a mother, and despite everything, I wanted to be there for one of the most important moments of her life. What I didn't anticipate was how the universe would conspire to make that day unforgettable for everyone involved. The plan began forming on a Tuesday evening, in mid-February, exactly 3 weeks before Cassie's baby shower. I was reviewing patient charts in my office at Seattle Medical Center when my phone buzzed with a text from David, containing a screenshot of the baby shower invitation. The elegant script font announced the celebration at Riverside Country Club, and seeing the formal details somehow crystallized my determination to be present for this milestone in my sister's life. I wasn't plotting revenge or planning some dramatic confrontation. Instead, I was driven by a simpler motivation, the recognition that family moments like this don't come around often, and despite our complicated relationship, I loved my sister. The fact that she'd chosen to exclude me based on her assumptions about my worth stung, but it also presented an opportunity to address the fundamental misunderstanding that had shaped our dynamic for years. My first call was to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the chief of emergency medicine at Seattle Medical Center. Patricia had become both a mentor and friend during my time there, and she was one of the few people who knew about my complicated family situation. I'd mentioned during previous conversations how my family remained unaware of my medical career, though I'd never gone into the full details of why I'd chosen to maintain that secrecy. "Patricia, I need to ask a favor," I said when she answered her phone. "I know this might sound unusual, but I need to arrange for some flexibility in my schedule for this weekend." "Everything okay, Natalie? You rarely ask for time off." I explained the situation carefully, outlining the baby shower exclusion and my desire to be in Portland that weekend, though I didn't yet have a concrete plan for how I'd handle the situation. Patricia listened without interruption, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "I've been thinking about expanding our community outreach program." We've been discussing partnerships with rural hospitals and clinics throughout the Pacific Northwest. Portland has several facilities that could benefit from our expertise. I felt a spark of possibility.
What kind of partnerships?
Educational seminars, consulting on difficult cases, emergency preparedness training. The kind of work that requires our attending physicians to visit partner facilities and demonstrate our capabilities. She paused meaningfully. I've been looking for the right physician to lead this initiative. Someone with excellent clinical skills and the ability to represent our hospital with distinction. The opportunity she was presenting was both professional and personal. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Dr. Natalie Brooks might be exactly the right person to conduct a site visit to Good Samaritan Hospital in Portland this weekend. Purely professional, of course, but if that visit happened to coincide with any personal commitments in the area, well, that would be entirely coincidental. Good Samaritan Hospital was where my grandmother had been treated during her heart attack, and it was also one of Portland's most prestigious medical facilities. More importantly, it was less than 10 minutes from Riverside Country Club. The pieces of a plan were beginning to align in ways that felt almost too perfect to be coincidental. "Patricia, you're brilliant. But I want to make sure this is legitimate and beneficial for the hospital, not just a personal favor. Natalie, you've published 3 papers on emergency trauma protocols in the past year alone. Your work on streamlining triage processes has been adopted by hospitals across the region. Good Samaritan has specifically requested consultation on updating their emergency department procedures. This isn't charity, it's good business." Within an hour, Patricia had arranged for me to conduct a formal consultation at Good Samaritan Hospital on Saturday morning, with the possibility of extending into the afternoon if additional training was needed. The timing was perfect. I could complete my professional obligations and still be available if any medical expertise was needed elsewhere in the Portland area. The next step was more delicate. I needed to ensure that my family would learn about my presence in Portland without it appearing that I was deliberately trying to disrupt Cassie's celebration. This required a level of strategic thinking that felt almost too calculated, but I reminded myself that my motivation wasn't malicious. I simply wanted the truth to emerge naturally, without forcing a confrontation that might overshadow what should be a joyful occasion for my sister. I called Margaret at Grind Coffee House. Even though I no longer worked there regularly, she remained one of my closest confidants and someone who understood the complexities of my situation better than anyone. "Margaret, I need your wisdom about something," I said when she answered. I'm going to be in Portland this weekend for work and I'm trying to figure out how to handle a delicate family situation. I explained about the baby shower exclusion and my planned consultation at Good Samaritan. Margaret listened thoughtfully, occasionally making small sounds of understanding that reminded me why I'd always found her so easy to talk to. You know, dear, sometimes the best way to handle these situations is to simply be yourself and let the truth speak for itself. You've spent so many years hiding your light under a bushel that your family has forgotten how brightly you shine. I don't want to upstage Cassie on her special day, but I also can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not just to make everyone else comfortable with their assumptions. The thing about truth, Margaret said gently, is that it has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. You can't force it, but you also can't keep suppressing it forever. Maybe this weekend is simply when the universe has decided it's time for your family to see who you really are. Her words resonated with something deep in my chest. I'd been carrying the weight of my secret for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to live authentically. The prospect of finally being seen and understood by my family was both terrifying and exhilarating. My next call was to Dr. Helena Rodriguez, the obstetrician who'd been recommended to Cassie by several of her affluent friends. Rodriguez through my professional network, as she was highly regarded in Portland's medical community and often consulted on high-risk pregnancies at Good Samaritan. This call required more careful navigation. I couldn't simply introduce myself as Cassie's sister without explaining why I was calling, but I also couldn't reveal the full complexity of the situation without potentially creating awkwardness for everyone involved. Dr. Rodriguez, this is Dr. Natalie Brooks from Seattle Medical Center. I'm calling about a professional matter, but it involves a personal connection as well. I explained that I would be consulting at Good Samaritan over the weekend and that my sister was one of Dr. Rodriguez's patients. I mentioned that Cassie was having a baby shower on Saturday and asked if there were any concerns about her pregnancy that might require additional medical attention during social events. Mrs. Brooks Patterson is doing very well, Dr. Rodriguez assured me. Her pregnancy has been textbook normal, and she's due in about 6 weeks. Are you concerned about something specific? Not concerned exactly. But as her sister and as a physician, I want to make sure she has access to medical support if anything unexpected happens. I know these events can be stressful, and sometimes stress can trigger complications. Dr. Rodriguez appreciated my professional concern, and we discussed the general protocols for handling medical emergencies at social events. She mentioned that she often carried her medical bag when attending functions where pregnant patients might be present, as a precautionary measure. Actually, she said thoughtfully, I'm planning to attend Mrs. Brooks Patterson's shower myself. Several of my patients will be there, and it's become something of a tradition for me to make brief appearances at these celebrations. Would it be helpful if I mentioned to the hostess that there's a physician in the family who could assist if needed? The offer was perfect, but I wanted to handle it delicately. I'd prefer to keep my presence quiet unless there's actually a need for medical assistance. My family isn't entirely aware of my medical background, and I don't want to create any unnecessary drama at what should be a celebration. Dr. Rodriguez seemed intrigued by this revelation but was too professional to pry into the personal dynamics. I'll simply be aware that additional medical expertise is available if circumstances require it. The final piece of my preparation involved arranging the practical details of my Portland visit. I booked a room at the Heathman Hotel downtown, close enough to both Good Samaritan Hospital and Riverside Country Club to allow for quick transitions between locations. I also arranged for a car service that could be on standby throughout the day, ensuring I could respond quickly to any situation that might arise. On Friday evening, I packed my medical bag alongside my weekend clothes, including the elegant navy dress I'd bought for occasions when I needed to look professional yet approachable. I'd learned during my residency that first impressions mattered enormously in medical settings, and I wanted to be prepared for any scenario that might unfold. The drive to Portland felt different than my usual family visits. Instead of the familiar anxiety about maintaining my cover story, I felt a sense of anticipation mixed with nervous energy. I was finally moving toward a moment of truth that had been years in the making, though I still wasn't sure exactly how that truth would reveal itself. I arrived at the Heathman just after 9 p.m. and spent the evening reviewing the consultation materials Patricia had prepared for my meeting at Good Samaritan. The emergency department protocols I'd be discussing were genuinely innovative, and I found myself excited about the professional aspects of the weekend alongside the personal uncertainties. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of Pacific Northwest sunshine that made everything feel possible. I dressed carefully in my consultation attire, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without being intimidating, paired with comfortable but elegant shoes that would allow me to move quickly if needed. The consultation at Good Samaritan went exceptionally well. The emergency department staff were eager to learn about the triage improvements we'd implemented in Seattle, and several of the attending physicians expressed interest in ongoing collaboration. Dr. Michael Chen, the department chief, was particularly enthusiastic about the patient flow modifications that had reduced wait times by nearly 30% at our facility. Dr. Brooks, your work here has been invaluable, he said as we concluded the formal presentation. I hope this is the beginning of a long partnership between our hospitals. As I was packing up my materials, one of the nurses mentioned that Dr. Rodriguez had stopped by earlier to express her thanks for the consultation. She said to tell you that she's looking forward to potentially working with you on some upcoming cases, and that she'll be at the country club event this afternoon if you happen to be in the area. The mention of the country club event sent a flutter of nervousness through my chest. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for was finally approaching. I returned to the Heathman to change clothes and mentally prepare for whatever the afternoon might bring. I'd chosen my navy dress specifically because it struck the right balance between elegant and understated. I wanted to look professional and polished without appearing to be trying too hard to impress anyone. At 2:30, I received a text from David. At Cassie's shower now. Really wish you were here. She looks beautiful and happy, but the guest list is exactly as pretentious as you'd expect. I smiled at his message and typed back, give her my love. I hope everything goes perfectly. What I didn't add was that I was currently sitting in the parking lot of Riverside Country Club, watching elegantly dressed women arrive for the celebration. Through the large windows of the event space, I could see pale pink and gold decorations, floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of carefully orchestrated perfection that Cassie had always excelled at creating. I wasn't planning to crash the party or make a dramatic entrance. I was simply making myself available, positioned where I could respond quickly if any medical expertise was needed. It was a long shot, and I acknowledged the possibility that I'd spend the afternoon sitting in my car before driving back to Seattle with nothing resolved. But sometimes the universe has its own timing, and as I would soon discover, this particular afternoon was destined to unfold in ways none of us could have anticipated. The emergency call came at exactly 3:47 p.m., just as I was considering whether to drive back to Seattle. My phone buzzed with Dr. Rodriguez's number, and her voice carried the controlled urgency I recognized from countless medical situations. Dr. Brooks, I need your assistance immediately. We have a medical emergency at the country club. One of the guests is experiencing severe complications, and I could use another physician's expertise. My heart rate spiked as I grabbed my medical bag from the passenger seat. What's the situation? Pregnant woman, 34 weeks, sudden onset of severe abdominal pain and bleeding. I'm concerned about placental abruption. The ambulance is en route, but we need immediate intervention. I was already moving toward the country club entrance as she spoke. I'm 90 seconds away. Have you established IV access? Working on it now. The patient is conscious but in significant distress. Blood pressure is dropping. The elegant lobby of Riverside Country Club transformed into a blur as I moved quickly toward the event space. Through the large windows, I could see the baby shower continuing in the main area, but there was clearly commotion near the restrooms. Several women in pastel dresses clustered anxiously around a partially closed door, their cheerful celebration energy replaced by worried murmurs. Dr. Rodriguez met me at the entrance to the ladies' lounge, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the panic surrounding us. Thank God you're here. The patient is Jennifer Martinez, 32 years old, G2P1, 34 weeks gestation. She collapsed about 10 minutes ago, complaining of severe abdominal pain. As we entered the lounge, I could see a woman lying on the marble floor, her elegant maternity dress stained with blood. Her face was pale and drawn with pain, and she was gripping the hand of another guest who was trying to keep her calm. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the lavender hand soap created a jarring sensory combination that immediately triggered my emergency medicine training. I knelt beside Jennifer and began my rapid assessment. Jennifer, I'm Dr. Brooks. Can you tell me when the pain started? About 15 minutes ago, she gasped. It came on suddenly, like someone stabbed me, and then I started bleeding. Her pulse was rapid and thready, classic signs of developing shock. I could feel the tension in her abdomen, another indicator that we were dealing with a serious complication. Dr. Rodriguez had managed to establish IV access and was preparing to administer fluids, but we both knew that definitive treatment would require immediate transport to a hospital with surgical capabilities. Blood pressure is 80/50 and dropping. Dr. Rodriguez reported quietly. Fetal heart rate is showing signs of distress. The situation was critical. Placental abruption was a life-threatening emergency for both mother and baby, requiring immediate surgical intervention. Every minute we delayed increased the risk of permanent complications or death. We need to move her now, I said, already mentally calculating the fastest route to Good Samaritan's obstetric unit. Can someone call ahead to Good Samaritan and tell them we're bringing in a 34-week pregnant woman with suspected placental abruption? We'll need OR prep and neonatal intensive care standing by. As Dr. Rodriguez made the call, I continued monitoring Jennifer's vital signs and trying to keep her stable. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Even in the midst of the medical crisis, I was literally kneeling on the floor of the country club, where my sister had deemed me too unsuccessful to attend her celebration. The ambulance should be here in 3 minutes, one of the guests called from the doorway. I recognized her as Sarah Chen, one of the dental practice owners Cassie had mentioned when explaining why I wouldn't fit in with the guest list. Sarah, I need you to go outside and direct the paramedics to this location immediately. Time is critical here. She nodded and hurried away, and I realized that in the intensity of the medical emergency, no one had yet questioned who I was or why I was there. Rodriguez had introduced me simply as Dr. Brooks, and everyone had assumed I belonged. As we worked to stabilize Jennifer, other guests began gathering near the entrance to the lounge. I could hear fragments of worried conversation, questions about what was happening, and someone trying to reach Jennifer's husband. The cheerful atmosphere of the baby shower had completely evaporated, replaced by the tense reality of a medical crisis. Doctor, her blood pressure is continuing to drop. Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. We may need to consider emergency procedures if the ambulance doesn't arrive soon. I nodded, already running through the protocols for emergency delivery in non-hospital settings. It wasn't ideal, but if Jennifer's condition deteriorated further, we might not have a choice. I was reaching for my phone to call Good Samaritan directly when I heard a familiar voice from the crowd of onlookers. Oh my God, is that Natalie? I looked up to see Cassie standing in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. She was wearing a beautiful pale pink dress that accentuated her pregnancy, and her hair was styled in elegant waves for her special day. But her expression was one of complete confusion as she tried to process what she was seeing. Cassie, not now, I said firmly, returning my attention to Jennifer. We have a medical emergency here, but what are you doing here? How did you even get in? And why is everyone calling you doctor? Dr. Rodriguez looked between us with sudden understanding. This is your sister, the one you mentioned? Family reunion later, I said tersely, noting that Jennifer's breathing was becoming more labored. Right now we need to focus on our patient. The sound of sirens approaching provided a welcome distraction from the family drama that was threatening to unfold. Within moments, the paramedics arrived with a stretcher and emergency equipment, transforming the elegant country club lounge into an impromptu emergency room. What do we have? Asked the lead paramedic, a woman whose confident demeanor immediately marked her as experienced. 34-week gestation, suspected placental abruption, dropping blood pressure, signs of fetal distress. I reported quickly. We've established IV access, and she's been stable for the past few minutes, but she needs immediate surgical evaluation. Copy that, Doc. We'll have her at Good Samaritan in 8 minutes. As the paramedics prepared Jennifer for transport, Dr. Rodriguez and I coordinated the handoff, ensuring that all relevant information was communicated clearly. I rode in the ambulance to provide continued medical support during transport, while Dr. Rodriguez followed in her car. The emergency department at Good Samaritan was ready for us, with the obstetric surgical team already scrubbed and waiting. Dr. Michael Chen, whom I'd worked with that morning during my consultation, greeted us at the door. Dr. Brooks, good to see you again so soon, though I wish it were under better circumstances. What's the situation? I provided a rapid handoff to the surgical team, detailing Jennifer's condition and the interventions we'd provided. Within minutes, she was being wheeled into the operating room for an emergency cesarean section, with the neonatal team standing by to care for her premature baby. Dr. Rodriguez and I waited in the surgical family area, both of us still processing the intensity of the past hour. That was excellent work under pressure, she said. Jennifer and her baby are alive, because of your quick thinking and expertise. It was a team effort. Your initial assessment and stabilization were crucial. As we debriefed the medical aspects of the emergency, my phone began buzzing with text messages. Word of what had happened at the baby shower was clearly spreading among my family members, and the questions were mounting. David's message was typical. Mom called and said something happened at Cassie's shower, and you were there helping with a medical emergency. Everyone is very confused. Can you call when you get a chance? My mother's text was more direct. Natalie, honey, Cassie is very upset and confused. She says you were at the country club and people were calling you doctor. We need to talk. But it was Cassie's message that carried the most emotional weight. I don't understand what happened today. How were you there? How did you know what to do? Why didn't anyone tell me you were a doctor? I feel like I don't know my own sister. Before I could begin formulating responses to any of these messages, Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite with good news. Both mother and baby are doing well. We delivered a healthy baby girl, 4 pounds 12 ounces. Jennifer lost more blood than we'd like, but she's stable and expected to make a full recovery. The relief was overwhelming. In the midst of all the family drama and personal complications, the most important outcome was that 2 lives had been saved. Can I see her? I asked. She's asking for both of you actually. She wants to thank the doctors who helped save her life. Jennifer was awake and alert in the recovery room, looking tired but relieved. Her husband had arrived, and was holding their tiny daughter, tears streaming down his face. Dr. Brooks, Jennifer said softly when she saw me. I don't know how to thank you. The nurses told me that if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so quickly, you don't need to thank me. I'm just glad everything worked out well. Your daughter is beautiful. I keep thinking about how random it was that you were there. What are the chances that there would be an emergency medicine doctor at a baby shower? It was a fair question, and one that I knew I'd be answering repeatedly in the coming days. But before I could respond, my phone rang with a call from Cassie. Natalie, where are you? Everyone's asking questions I can't answer. Mom and Dad are driving to Portland because they're so confused about what happened. You need to come home and explain what's going on. I looked around the recovery room at Jennifer and her family, at Dr. Rodriguez, who had become an unexpected ally, and at Dr. Chen, who represented the professional world I'd built for myself. Then I thought about my family, waiting for explanations that were years overdue. I'll be there in an hour, I told Cassie, and yes, we definitely need to talk. As I left the hospital, I realized that the careful balance I'd maintained between my 2 worlds had finally collapsed completely. There was no going back to the simple narrative of Natalie, the coffee shop worker who lacked direction. The truth was out, messy and complicated and impossible to ignore. The drive to my parents' house felt like traveling between universes. Just hours earlier, I'd been the excluded sister, deemed too unsuccessful to attend a family celebration. Now I was returning as Dr. Natalie Brooks, emergency medicine physician, whose expertise had quite literally saved a life. The question wasn't whether my family would accept this new reality. The question was whether we could rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty, after years of assumptions and misunderstandings. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I could see lights on in every room of the house. Through the kitchen window, I glimpsed my mother pacing while she talked on the phone, probably coordinating with other family members about this unexpected development. David's car was already in the driveway, and I could see him through the living room window, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to someone I couldn't see. I sat in my car for a moment, collecting my thoughts and preparing for what would certainly be one of the most important conversations of my life. My medical bag sat on the passenger seat, still containing the equipment that had helped save Jennifer's life just hours earlier. It was a tangible reminder of who I really was, regardless of how my family had chosen to see me. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my bag and walked toward the front door, ready to finally introduce my family to the person I'd always been. Walking through the front door of my childhood home felt like entering a courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant, the key witness, and the surprise expert testimony all rolled into one. The familiar scent of my mother's vanilla candles mixed with the lingering aroma of the coffee my father always brewed too strong created an unexpectedly comforting backdrop for what I knew would be an emotionally charged conversation. The living room fell silent as I entered. My parents sat together on the sectional sofa they'd bought when I started high school, my mother's hands clasped tightly in her lap while my father's reading glasses hung forgotten around his neck. David stood near the fireplace, leaning against the mantel in that way he did when he was processing something difficult. But it was Cassie who commanded my attention. She sat in the armchair that had always been her preferred spot during family meetings, still wearing her beautiful pink maternity dress from the shower, though her carefully styled hair now showed signs of the stress she'd endured. Her face was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something that might have been anger, though I couldn't be sure. "Sit down, sweetheart," my mother said gently, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the sofa. "We have so many questions." I remained standing, clutching my medical bag like a shield. "I know you do, and I owe you all an explanation. A long overdue explanation." "Natalie," my father began, his voice carrying the careful tone he used when trying to navigate emotionally complex situations. "Cassie told us what happened at the shower. She said people were calling you doctor, that you handled a medical emergency like a trained professional. But I don't understand how that's possible." The weight of 7 years of deception sat heavy in my chest, because I am a trained professional, Dad. I'm a board-certified emergency medicine physician. I work at Seattle Medical Center where I've been an attending physician for the past 2 years. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking each second. My mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like grief. "But you work at the coffee shop," she said finally. "You've been working at Grind for years. We've seen you there." I did work at Grind, but only part-time while I was in medical school. Margaret knew the truth from the beginning. She helped me maintain the flexibility I needed to complete my education and training. Cassie spoke for the first time since I'd entered the room, her voice tight with emotion. "Are you telling us that for the past 7 years, while we thought you were serving coffee and struggling to find direction, you were actually becoming a doctor?" The single word carried so much pain that it made my chest ache. Why would you lie to us for so long? Why would you let us worry about you, let us think you were failing at life, when you were actually succeeding beyond anything we could have imagined? I finally sat down, placing my medical bag carefully beside me. Because I needed to know who would love me for who I was, not what I could achieve. I needed to understand what our relationships were really built on. "That's not fair," David said, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You can't test people's love by lying to them. That's not how family works." He was right, and his words hit harder than any anger or accusation could have. "You're absolutely right, David. What I did wasn't fair. But I was 22 years old when I started medical school, terrified of failure, and overwhelmed by the pressure of living up to expectations. By the time I realized how wrong my approach was, I was too deep into the deception to know how to get out." My mother leaned forward, her eyes filled with tears. "Honey, we would have been so proud of you. We would have supported you through every step of medical school, celebrated every achievement, worried with you through every challenge. Instead, we spent years concerned that you weren't living up to your potential. I know, Mom, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for putting you through that worry." Cassie stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out onto the backyard where we'd played as children. "Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? All those times I tried to help you, tried to give you advice about your career, tried to set you up with people who might help you find direction. All those times I felt sorry for you, felt guilty about my own success because you seemed to be struggling." The pain in her voice was evident, and I realized that my deception had affected her in ways I'd never considered. "Cassie, I excluded you from my baby shower because I thought you'd feel uncomfortable around successful women. Do you understand how that makes me look? How that makes me feel about myself as a sister?" She turned from the window to face me, and I could see tears streaming down her face. "I defended my decision to Mom and Dad. I told them you'd be happier staying home. I convinced myself I was protecting you from feeling inadequate." The full weight of how my choices had impacted my family was becoming clear, and it was more devastating than I'd imagined. I'd been so focused on protecting myself from judgment and pressure that I'd failed to consider how my deception was shaping their behavior toward me. "The worst part," Cassie continued, "is that I've spent years acting superior to you, talking down to you, treating you like you needed my guidance and protection, and all this time, you've been saving lives while I've been selling marketing campaigns. Your work matters too, Cassie. What you do has value and impact. Don't," she said sharply, "don't minimize this by trying to make me feel better about my career choices. This isn't about whose job is more important. This is about the fact that I've been condescending to someone who was actually more accomplished than I could have imagined." My father, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke. Natalie, I understand that you had your reasons for keeping this secret initially. But maintaining this deception for years, letting us worry about your future, letting your sister exclude you from important events because she was trying to protect your feelings, that goes beyond just wanting privacy about your career. His disappointment was harder to bear than any anger would have been. You're right, Dad, there's no excuse for how long I let this go on. I kept telling myself I was protecting the family from pressure and expectations, but really I was protecting myself from the possibility of disappointing you if I failed. But you didn't fail, my mother said softly. You succeeded brilliantly, you became exactly what you dreamed of becoming. Why couldn't you share that joy with us? The question hung in the air, and I realized that at the heart of my deception was a fundamental misunderstanding about what my family's love was based on. I'd been so afraid of conditional love that I'd never given them the chance to show me their love was unconditional. I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid that if I told you about medical school, and then didn't make it through, you'd see me as a failure. Afraid that if I became successful, our relationships would change, and become about what I'd achieved rather than who I was. And somewhere along the way, the lie became easier to maintain than the truth was to reveal. David sat down heavily in the chair Cassie had vacated. Nat, do you remember when I was struggling to build my design business? When I had that string of failed projects, and was barely making rent? I nodded, remembering how worried the family had been during that difficult period. Did any of us love you less during that time? Did anyone treat you differently because your career was uncertain? No, I said quietly. Then why did you think we'd treat you differently if your medical career had challenges? Why did you assume our love was conditional when you'd never experienced it as conditional? His question cut to the core of my fears and revealed how unfounded they'd been. I'd projected anxieties onto my family that weren't based on their actual behavior or character. Cassie returned to her chair, her expression softening slightly. I need to understand something. When I was talking about the shower guests, listing their achievements, describing why you wouldn't fit in, how did that make you feel? I considered her question carefully. Hurt, angry, frustrated, but also sad because I realized that the sister I loved had bought into the same assumptions about worth and success that I'd been running away from. What do you mean, Cassie? You're brilliant and accomplished and driven. But the way you've learned to measure people's value, the way you've absorbed the idea that career success equals human worth, that's not who you really are. That's not the sister who used to defend me when kids at school were mean, or who stayed up all night helping me with science projects. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing what I'd said. You think I've become superficial. I think you've become trapped in a world that judges people by their achievements rather than their character. And I think my deception allowed you to feel superior in a way that isn't healthy for either of us. My mother had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. You both lost something important because of this secret. Cassie, you lost the opportunity to know and celebrate your sister's real achievements. And Natalie, you lost the opportunity to experience your family's genuine support and pride. There's something else, I said, knowing that complete honesty required sharing the full scope of my success. The work I do, the salary I earn as an attending physician, it's substantial, more than substantial. I could have helped with family expenses, contributed to celebrations, supported causes that matter to us. Instead, I let you all worry about my financial stability while I was actually in a position to help. My father's eyebrows rose. How substantial are we talking about? Enough that I could pay off your mortgage tomorrow, if you'd let me. Enough that Cassie's baby could have a college fund that would cover any university in the country. Enough that none of us would ever have to worry about money again. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming conversation. I could see my parents exchanging glances, trying to process not just the deception but the implications of what I was telling them. I don't want your money, Cassie said quietly. I want my sister back. I want to know the person you really are, not the version you've been performing for us. I want that too, I said. More than anything. Over the next 2 hours, we talked through 7 years of missed connections and misunderstandings. I told them about medical school, about the challenges and triumphs they'd missed. I described my residency, my current work, the patients I'd helped, and the lives I'd touched. I shared my fears and doubts, the moments when I'd almost given up, the times when I desperately wanted their support but felt trapped by my own deception. In return, they shared how my perceived struggles had affected them. My mother talked about the sleepless nights she'd spent worrying about my future. My father described the conversations he'd had with colleagues about how to help adult children find direction. David admitted that he'd sometimes felt guilty about his own success when he thought I was struggling. Most painfully, Cassie revealed how she'd used my apparent lack of achievement to justify her own feelings of superiority, how she'd developed a condescending attitude that made her feel worse about herself even as she was expressing it. "The thing is," she said, "I knew something was off. You were too confident, too articulate, too knowledgeable about things for someone who was supposedly directionless. But instead of questioning my assumptions, I convinced myself that you were just good at hiding your insecurities." As the evening wore on, something began to shift in the room. The initial shock and hurt started giving way to understanding, and gradually to something that felt like relief. We were finally talking to each other honestly, without pretense or performance. "What happens now?" David asked as we all sat in the gentle exhaustion that follows emotionally intense conversations. "Now we rebuild," I said. "I want to be part of this family as who I really am. I want to attend Cassie's baby shower, if she'll have me, and I want to help plan her baby's future. I want to contribute to family decisions and celebrations. I want to stop hiding." Cassie looked at me thoughtfully. "The shower is ruined anyway. After what happened with Jennifer, everyone left early. But maybe we could plan a different kind of celebration. Something more authentic." "I'd like that." My mother reached over and took my hand. "Honey, we're proud of you. We're so incredibly proud of who you've become and what you've accomplished. But we're also hurt that you felt you couldn't share that with us. It's going to take time to rebuild the trust that was damaged." "I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." My father nodded slowly. "We love you, Natalie. We've always loved you, and we always will. But you're right that things need to change. We all need to examine how we think about success and worth and family support." 3 weeks later, we gathered at my parents' house for what Cassie had dubbed a redo celebration. Instead of an elaborate country club event with carefully curated guest lists, we had a backyard barbecue with immediate family and close friends who knew and cared about us as people rather than achievements. Jennifer Martinez and her healthy baby daughter attended, along with Dr. Rodriguez, who had become an unexpected friend. Margaret from Grind Coffee House was there, finally able to publicly acknowledge her role in supporting my medical career. David's girlfriend came, along with several of our cousins and family friends who had known us since childhood. But the most meaningful change was in how we talked to each other. Cassie asked thoughtful questions about my work, sharing genuine interest in the medical cases I found challenging. She also talked about her own career with less defensiveness, acknowledging both the parts she loved and the aspects of the marketing world she found frustrating. My parents seemed relieved to finally understand their younger daughter's life, and they embraced their new role as family members of a physician, with enthusiasm and appropriate pride. They started volunteering with a medical charity I supported, finding their own ways to contribute to healthcare in the community. Most importantly, we began planning for Cassie's daughter's future with honesty about our family's resources and capabilities. I established a generous education fund for my niece, while Cassie and Marcus contributed their own expertise in business and finance. We were building something together, rather than maintaining artificial separation. The baby arrived 6 weeks later, healthy and beautiful. I was in the delivery room, as both family member and medical professional, able to provide reassurance and support in ways I'd never been able to before. When little Emma Rose took her first breath, I held her with hands that had delivered dozens of babies professionally, but this time the joy was purely personal. Cassie recovered beautifully from delivery, and during those first days of new motherhood, she often said that having a doctor in the family brought her peace of mind she hadn't expected. When Emma developed a minor fever at 2 weeks old, I was able to provide immediate assessment and appropriate reassurance, preventing an unnecessary emergency room visit. "You know what's funny?" Cassie said one afternoon, as we sat in her nursery, watching Emma sleep. "I spent so many years worried that you weren't living up to your potential, and it turns out you were exceeding mine." "That's not how I see it," I replied. "We were both becoming who we needed to be. You built a successful career and created a beautiful family. I became a doctor and learned how to help people in crisis. Neither path is more valuable than the other. But I was so condescending to you, so dismissive and superior. How do you forgive that?" I considered her question carefully, because I understand where it came from. You were operating with incomplete information, making decisions based on what you thought you knew. And honestly, my deception contributed to those dynamics. We both have things to forgive. 6 months after Emma's birth, Cassie made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She resigned from her high-pressure marketing position and started a nonprofit organization focused on supporting healthcare workers and their families. She used her business skills to create programs that provided childcare, education assistance, and mental health support for medical professionals. I realized that watching you save Jennifer's life changed something fundamental in how I think about meaningful work, she explained, when she announced her career change. I want to use my skills to support people who are making a difference in the world. The nonprofit became a family project. I provided medical expertise and connections within the healthcare community. David designed marketing materials and created a website that beautifully told the stories of the families we supported. My parents contributed their accounting and administrative skills, helping establish the financial systems that would ensure the organization's sustainability. Margaret from Grind Coffee House became an unexpected board member, bringing her years of experience supporting young people through difficult transitions. Dr. Rodriguez joined our medical advisory panel, helping identify the most pressing needs among healthcare workers in our region. What started as a family crisis became the foundation for something larger than any of us could have created individually. We learned that authentic relationships, built on honesty rather than assumptions, could support achievements that none of us had imagined possible. A year after that transformative baby shower, I received an invitation to speak at a medical conference about work-life balance and family relationships. As I prepared my presentation, I reflected on how fundamentally my life had changed since the day I sat in the Riverside Country Club parking lot, uncertain about how to bridge the gap between my professional and personal identities. The speech I gave focused on the importance of authenticity in all our relationships, professional and personal. I talked about the costs of deception, even when it seems motivated by protection or privacy. I discussed how assumptions about success and worth can damage family dynamics, and how healing requires commitment from everyone involved. But mostly I talked about the unexpected gifts that come when we allow ourselves to be truly seen and known by the people who matter most to us. After the conference, I drove home to Seattle, but stopped in Portland to have dinner with my family. We gathered at Cassie's house, where Emma was taking her first tentative steps, and filling the rooms with laughter and chaos. As I watched my niece stumble and fall, and get back up with determination, I thought about the parallel journey our family had taken. We'd stumbled, fallen, and hurt each other in ways that seemed irreparable. But we'd also gotten back up, chosen forgiveness over resentment, and rebuilt something stronger than what we'd had before. Cassie was right that the original baby shower had been ruined, but in its place, we'd created something infinitely more valuable, a family built on truth, respect, and unconditional love. And as I held Emma that evening, watching her practice walking between the adults who adored her, I knew that she would grow up in a family that valued character over achievement, authenticity over performance, and love over everything else. The medical bag that had once been a symbol of my secret life now sat openly in Cassie's kitchen, a reminder that family emergencies come in many forms, and the best preparation is simply being ready to show up as yourself, with all your skills and love, whenever you're needed most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.